Good morning.
Again, Mike Giannetti, Pastoral Associate for Evangelization here at St. Aloysius. And our topic this morning is Introduction to Morality, which is kind of roughly chapters 11, 12, and 13 in your book. So just like last time, really feel free to ask. Well, you can answer your own questions too, but feel free to ask questions at any time. That's a good way of slowing me down. That's what we always used to do in college when professors would just get on a roll. Just like ask any question. Ask them what they're doing for dinner or whatever, just to slow them down. So, again, questions at any time. If anything doesn't make sense, please throw your hand up. Give me a chance to catch my breath as well. Plus, we'll have a little bit of class participation today. I'm going to need some readers. So again, intro to Catholic morality, and ironically enough, as I was preparing for this class, I came to the conclusion that much of the material today is less Catholic than it really is just observations about reality, observations about this realm that we inhabit. And it's great evidence of the great philosophical and intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church. Again, all this stuff about the Catholic Church being anti-science or anti-woman or anti-education is just total garbage. Catholic Church is responsible for saving the ancient knowledge of Greece and Rome. If I've gotten farther in my history of the Church presentation, we would learn more about how Catholic Church was responsible for the founding of the the first universities in Europe, and also promoting arts and intellectual discovery during the Renaissance.
And medicine.
And medicine as well, absolutely. So again, much of what we're going to talk about today is the philosophical underpinnings of morality, and that these are universal for all people, regardless of whether we're Catholic or not. Notice also that I said the word philosophical and not theological. So what's the difference? So theology, that word literally means study of God. So theos, God, from the Greek word, and then logi, like geology, philosophy, theology, biology, it means study of. So literally, theology, study of God. Philosophy, on the other hand, comes from the Greek philo, which means love. Philosophy literally means love of wisdom. Philo, love, and then Sophia, Sophie, wisdom. So philosophy, love of wisdom. So we'll have a kind of a mix of philosophy and theology today, but most of it is actually theology. And I bring this up because we can arrive at philosophical conclusions as rational beings. Theology, to a certain extent, we need God's revelation to understand God. But philosophical conclusions, we can reach on our own as rational beings. So less about theology today and more about us and our human experience. And along those lines, I think one of the things that can be very, very helpful for us and for our sanity, really, is to acknowledge that there is an objective reality, right? That there, kind of whether we like it or not, there are certain things that are just the way they are, no matter what we do. We can agree with them, we can disagree, we can ignore, we can deny, but ultimately things are the way they are. We're not gods, we can't change reality. We live in a realm created by a higher power. In our tradition, of course, we call this God. And there are universal truths about the way that this realm operates. And that can be physically or metaphysically as well. So these physical truths might be like the laws of physics, gravity, the laws of thermodynamics. These are certain unalterable things that we have no power over, that we've just kind of discovered. This is just the way this world operates. The same way there are metaphysical or moral truths, laws, principles about the way that this realm operates. And that's going to be kind of our discussion today. So just like we have physical truths, we also have metaphysical, spiritual truths, some of which involve morality. Does that kind of make sense? Because that's kind of the undergirding of the whole kind of lesson here today. All right. All right. So we'll begin by talking about laws, but not like the rules and regulations and you can't do this and don't do that. Laws as in the idea of principles. Principles of reality, again, like the laws of physics. Laws in the sense of something that we know to be true, like mathematical laws. So in this case, uppercase L, rather than lowercase l. Uppercase, we talk about big T, little t truth. These are uppercase L laws, but they're about our truth in this case, not like laws like traffic laws or those kind of things. And I think the best quote I've ever heard on this actually comes from Father David McConey, who comes every year about 4th of July. He has some good friends here in town. He's a Jesuit priest from the University of St. Louis, and he's really good friends with the Desmonds, and he comes in every summer, and he usually says the 4th of July Mass. Really good Jesuit priest. And one of his favorite quotes is he says, something isn't true because the Catholic Church teaches it. The Church teaches it because it is true. And that's kind of a sense of where we're going today. It's this idea people think, oh, the Church just says this stuff and it wants it to be true because the Church says so. No, the Church teaches it because it's true, not because it says that it's true. So again, kind of those ideas about laws too. And I take my definition of law from St. Thomas Aquinas, who defined a law as a command of reason promulgated by a competent authority for the common good. Kind of unpack that. So command of reason, in other words, it's logical. It makes sense. You may agree or disagree with it, but there's a certain logic to it. It makes sense. Competent authority, that's legitimately authority. In ancient times, divine right of kings, democracy, coming from a legitimate source. And then for the common good, exists for the benefit of the common good, at least in general terms. Maybe not everybody specifically, but in general, the intent is good for the good of all. So command of reason, promulgated by competent authority for the common good. All right, that's a lot of heavy stuff, but there's 3 kinds of laws that we're going to talk about. Divine positive law, natural moral law, and human positive law. And together these are collectively known as the eternal law of God. Okay, so the first one, divine positive law. Laws explicitly revealed to man by God. Divine law is law explicitly revealed to man by God. Any guesses of what an example of this kind of law might be?
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments. Margaret gets the $5 question. Excellent. That's exactly the one I was going for. So I need somebody to read a passage of the Bible for me. I need Exodus chapter 20. I need a volunteer. Matthew. Exodus 20, 1 through 17. Second book of the Bible.
Start at 1?
Mm-hmm.
Alright. Then God delivered all these commandments. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that place of slavery. You shall not have other gods besides me. You shall not carve idols for yourselves in the shape of anything in the sky above, or on the sky below, or in the waters beneath the earth. You shall not bow down before them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting punishment for their fathers' wickedness on the children of those who hate me, down to the 3rd and 4th generation, but bestowing mercy down to the 1,000th generation on the children of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave unpunished him who takes his name in vain. Remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. No work may be done then either by you or your son or your daughter, or your male or female slave, or your beast, or by the alien who lives with you. In 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but the 7th day he rested. That is why the Lord has blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, and that you may have a long life in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male or female slave, nor his ox or ass, or anything else that belongs to him.
Thank you, Matthew. Do you guys remember the TV show from the late 80s, early 90s, Alf? Alien. It has biblical precedent that don't make that alien that lives with you do work on the Sabbath. It's not the reason I made you read that, but that's just one of my all-time favorite TV shows. It's a lot of fun. So thank you. So there it is, 10 Commandments, God literally from on high telling people this is the way that I'd like you to live. That's our classic example of divine positive law. So divine, because it's revealed by God. Positive, kind of an alternate fifth definition down of positive in the dictionary. In other words, straightforward, no gray area, very unambiguous, very, very accessible. So divine positive law, specific directions from God to mankind about how we are to live. And these divine laws apply to all people who've kind of reached the age of reason, able to rationally act for themselves, which the church generally defines as second grade or 7 years old. So I just want to go through the 10 Commandments specifically because they kind of have very specific, don't do this, but really, what is the larger context? Because really, all of our moral life falls within the 10 Commandments somewhere. So the first one, I'm the Lord thy God, don't have strange gods before me. But this is more than just not being pagans, right? That's a baseline, but really it's about putting God first in our lives. Not worshiping the idols of our day, money, wealth, power, possessions, honor, those kind of things. Second one, don't take the name, go ahead.
Something I had never heard before until he read this is that it says, I, the Lord, am a jealous God,
Yes.
and I will punish unto the second and third generations, but I will give mercy up to how many? 1,000 generations for those that obey this. And I thought, so God's overriding feature is love.
Yes. No, it's amazing how we it gets lost in there, right?
Yeah.
No, it absolutely is. Also, a great motivation to follow the first commandment. Your answer or your progeny will benefit from your devotion to this. The second, commandment has to deal with, not taking the name of God in vain, but also recognizing that God is that greater being than us, and we shouldn't use flippantly God's name, and also not using God's name in anger or jest, or also, in foul language, those kind of things. Second commandment, or the third one, keeping holy the Sabbath, pretty straightforward. That's going to church. That's refraining from unnecessary servile work on Sunday. Really setting aside the day as sacred to God. And again, it's not so much that God needs it. He wants that worship. He desires us to orient and center our lives on Him, but He also knows that we need a break, and that going to church recharges us spiritually. Even if we don't feel it, it does. And eventually, as we grow in our relationship with Him, you do really start to feel it. So it's not so much like, you guys got to I'm feeling jealous, you guys forgot about me, you need to take a break out and spend time with me. Yes, but not really. God doesn't need that. He wants it and desires it for us to take a break, to recenter on Him and the things that are important in life. Fourth commandment, obviously, respecting parents, but beyond that, also all of those who have legitimate authority over us. Fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. People are like, I'm really good at doing this one. I don't kill people. Again, beyond that. Move beyond that. Really, it's beyond not harming ourselves or others in any way. But that may be verbally, emotionally, physically as well.
Abortion?
Well, sure, absolutely. The sixth, thou shalt not commit adultery, which is just general prohibitions against all sins of an immoral sexual nature. Again, so many things there beyond just the one that's mentioned. Seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal. It's just like, don't take other people's stuff, but in any context, whether that be intellectual property or otherwise. Eighth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Again, a lot here. Lying, gossiping, passing on things that damage another person's reputation, slander, libel, those kind of things. Again, it's really dealing with a lot of, verbal type of sins here. And then the ninth commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Again, kind of a synergy with the sixth commandment here in terms of prohibitions against internal sexual desire of an immoral nature. Going to the idea that our actions stem from our thoughts and our emotions, and so that both things matter. Being aware of those things, where the root of those may be. Same thing with the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods. Kind of an extension of the 7th commandment. Well, don't take their stuff, but don't start it off with a jealousy or an envy that could grow to actually taking their stuff at one point. Again, both thoughts, desires, and actions matter. So again, kind of one way or another, all of our moral life falls within this eternal law of God found in the 10 Commandments. So that's kind of the classic example, but really the definitive example of divine positive law. Let's move on to natural law. In this case, natural moral law, we often just call it natural law. So natural law isn't written down like the 10 Commandments or like traffic laws. Natural law is written in the hearts of men and women. And this is the basic ethics of right and wrong that we all can arrive at by the use of our reason as rational, intelligent beings. So natural law, because it is natural, is known by reason, naturally, by who we are as created human beings. And moral law, in this case, because it only applies to moral acts that have consequences. Well, should we have mashed potatoes or baked potatoes? There's no moral qualms there, per se. Although I would say that mashed potatoes are objectively better. We can debate that. So, and also as natural law, it applies to rational actors. So not animals, not people that have not reached the age of reason. Natural law does not require divine revelation. And there's evidence of this because in all ancient pagan societies, we're not dealing with the Hebrew people, but the Babylonians or even the Aztecs, right? All ancient societies had some type of laws forbidding murder or perjury or taking other people's stuff, overarching basic human morality, not necessary to have divine revelation from. Ancient societies, even people today, natural law is written on our hearts, basic principles of right and wrong. Again, are able to be arrived at by use of natural reason, common sense, again, that God has written on our hearts. And you'll also notice, right, the 10 Commandments that we just went through, they contain natural law within them. Really, Commandments 4 through 10 are all natural law as far as honoring father and mother, don't kill, don't take other people's stuff, don't take their wife, don't lie. That's actually natural law right in there. God was basically dummy-proofing the 10 Commandments for us. Really, divine positive law is the first three. We might not be able to, understand, the way that God wanted to be worshipped perfectly, and the idea of not taking God's name in vain and honoring a specific day as God. Those are divine positive law for sure. But really, then the rest of the commandments are natural law. Again, basic principles of right and wrong that we're able to arrive at without divine law. But God thought this through. Evidence of God's mind. Wait, if I only give these Israelites 3 divine laws, they're going to be like, so we don't have to worry about the not killing people part? Again, God's dummy-proofing the 10 Commandments for them. 10 Commandments include divine law and, as evidence of what we've just discussed, the natural law as well. So God was anticipating our rationality. He only mentioned some of these. That means he left some others out that I guess we can ignore those. God seeing through our ways at a time. So, divine positive law comes from God. Natural law, that's written on our hearts as rational beings, is the way that God created us. And then the last one, human positive law. And this is the laws created by people, for people. They grow from divine law and from natural law, but not necessarily specifically what we're talking about here. Again, human, created by people, for people. Positive, again, clearly written down, revealed, accessible. There's kind of 2 types of human positive law. These are civil law and canon law. We all know what civil law is. These are the rules and regulations that govern our society. Again, passed by a rulemaking body, enforced by an executive body, and then kind of interpreted or enforced judiciously by a judge or judiciary. It's kind of a basic system of democracy that we have as far as our federal government or our governments. Kind of a lawmaking body, an enforcement body, and an interpretive judiciary. So that's civil law. Then we also have canon law, which this is church law. It comes from the Greek word, canon, meaning rule. So that's just the canon law is the rules of the church. The laws governing the church and the activities of the people of the church. The Code of Canon Law has 1,752 laws detailing the rights, privileges, duties, responsibilities, of governance of the Catholic Church. Most of them have applied largely to what do you do if a bishop is a heretic, but he is in this side of the diocese, and all this minutiae stuff. But all that to say, two types of human positive law: civil law and church law. Civil law and canon law. So to recap, divine positive law, 10 Commandments, comes from God, revealed by God. Natural moral law, revealed by nature, able to arrive at by use of our reason, is created in intellectual and rational human beings. And then human positive law, civil law and canon law. Think of it this way. God says stealing is wrong. We can also arrive at this by use of our reason, but it's human robbery laws that will actually get you punished for it. Interestingly enough. Any questions? Pretty straightforward. That's the driest, most boring part of the day. So we got through law.
But it wasn't dry or boring.
Somebody's trying to score points with the teacher. All right. So in addition to the 10 Commandments, the Catholic Church has also established 7 rules for the faithful to follow as part of our role as Catholics. This again comes from the teaching authority of the Church when Jesus said to St. Peter, "Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven," from Matthew. So these are known as the 7 precepts of the Church. I'm going to go through these a little more detail because we know the 10 Commandments. We went through these. But precepts of the Church, a lot of times people are not as familiar with. And I believe I have these on the, I hope everybody got the handout so you don't have to take as many notes. A lot of the overarching principles are on the handout. Okay, so 7 precepts of the Church. To attend Mass on all Sundays and holy days of obligation. To confess our sins at least once a year. To receive Holy Communion during the Easter season. To fast and abstain on the days appointed. To contribute to the support of the Church. To observe the laws of the Church concerning marriage. And to support the missionary work of the Church. And again, I'll go through these. These are interesting. There's some interesting reasons why we observe these. So the first one, to attend Mass on all Sundays and holy days of obligation. So there's 6 days, holy days of obligation in the United States, and we'll go through these. So it'd be odd kind of the way I'm going through this, but again, our liturgical year begins in Advent, so we're actually, as Father Mark used to come in and say to the classrooms on the first week of Advent, you know, Happy New Year, so it's very much our new year in the Church. So the first one is on Christmas Day, December 25th. And then we've got the Feast of Mary, the Mother of God, on January 1st. Ascension Thursday, which is 40 days after Easter. We'll come back to this one because this one generally gets moved. But Ascension Thursday, which is 40 days after Easter. The Assumption of Mary into Heaven on August 15th. This is the big celebration down in Cary every year. All Saints' Day on November 1st. And then technically today would be one if it wasn't a Sunday, the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December 8th. And we'll talk about when these days fall and how they get moved and those kind of things. So Christmas, Mary the Mother of God, Ascension, Assumption, All Saints' Day, and Immaculate Conception. So these are days that the Church asks us to come to Mass. Of course, you know, depending on work schedules and what we have the ability to go to a vigil Mass the night before, just like on Saturdays that count for Sunday. Do you guys know why we were able to do this idea of going to Mass the night before?
Day starts after sunset.
Yes.
Into the next.
So the Church, there's great, you know, the Church does a great job of embracing its Jewish heritage, right? And that's the Jewish way of reckoning days. Whereas we, you know, sunrise to sunset, the Jewish tradition was from sunset to sunset. So this idea that Sunday would start Saturday night at sunset, counting that is the day. So that's where we get the idea of the vigil Masses, where you go to Mass the night before and have it count, at least in our minds, for the next day. Again, that Jewish heritage, that Jewish reckoning of days from sunset to sunset. Now, this obligation to attend Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation is bound by a severity of a mortal sin, that this is something very important that we need to participate in the life of the Church. Of course, this is within reason, right? You know, if we're sick or we've got somebody that's very ill that we have to take care of course that's the priority.
And Father Tom addressed that
Last
in the
Sunday's bulletin was
Yeah, some great bulletins article.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the last two, so you can go online if you want to read what he said about that.
Yeah, he had a nice commentary on this. And again, this isn't the church being arbitrary. You know, again, it's a precept of the church. God gave us this authority. Also, directly comes from the third commandment, right? On, keep holy the Sabbath. But also, in a way, it's also the first commandment, because God has said, this is the way you are to worship and spend time with me. And really, if we're not doing that, it's really a violation of the first commandment. Because in some ways, it's idolatry. Whether that's an idolatry of sleep, or other priorities, or other plans, or I don't feel like it, it really then that becomes our pagan idol in a certain way. So that's why there is a great seriousness about these obligations. So there's kind of multiple things that it can run afoul of. But again, once you get in the habit of it, even when it comes to vacations, it becomes a great opportunity to check out other places, and there are other really cool churches that you might not otherwise gone to because you make it that priority. And again, so going back to these holy days specifically, generally if these holy days fall on a Monday or a Friday, they're kind of dispensed with. They don't count. Church recognizes the difficulty of people making it to church on consecutive days. And at least in our diocese, we always do a good job of promoting and letting people know, like, is it an obligation this year or not? For example, we have a great example today. Today, December 8th, normally would be the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. What takes precedent, in our case, is the second Sunday of Advent. So generally, the feast days get moved. So if you come to daily Mass tomorrow, we'll celebrate Immaculate Conception, but it is not a holy day of obligation. We do celebrate it because Mary's Immaculate Conception is the patroness of the United States, so it's still kind of a national feast day for Our Lady, but there is none of the moral obligation to attend Mass.
And by the way, the church will have calendars out, and those calendars will tell you who the saint of the day is, all that kind of stuff, and it'll tell you if it's a holy day of obligation.
Right.
So grab a calendar this year.
And also Ascension in our diocese is then 40 days after Easter, usually is a Thursday. That's been moved kind of permanently to the closest Sunday is when we celebrate Ascension. So no real worries about missing that one there. And again, I see this as a great evidence of, there are certain things that our church says, no, these are important tenets of our faith where it's important for us to gather and celebrate and recognize God is the most important thing in our lives. But again, the Catholic Church isn't unreasonable or unchanging when these things happen to fall in inconvenient places in the weeks, whether they're moved to Sundays or dispensed with. So interesting, we went through that whole list. Does there seem to be like one big religious feast day that was left out? Like obviously, glaringly missing?
Easter.
Easter! Why isn't Easter on this list? Somebody other than Matthew. All right, Matthew.
It's on a Sunday.
It's already on a Sunday. Easter Sunday, you're already coming to church. It's not a holy day of obligation because you're already there because it's Sunday. Fun stuff. All right, so that's the Sundays and holy days of obligation. The rest of these go more quickly. But second one, to confess our sins at least once a year. Pretty straightforward. Again, receiving that forgiveness from Jesus in the sacrament is huge. Generally, Catholics go once during Lent and then another time during Advent. We have our Advent penance service coming up tomorrow, actually, in church. And then, of course, that's kind of the minimum once a year. Monthly is a good practice to get into. It really, it's amazing.
It's much easier if you go more often.
Yes.
If you go once a year, it's terrifying.
Yes.
If you make it a more regular practice, you don't have to think back so far, and it's not so scary.
It's
You
true.
don't get used to it.
And after a while, you really you start to enjoy the grace of that sacrament and the
And
cleansing
feel it.
that it is.
Yeah.
If you are already dreading that idea, please read the children's notes that are hanging up on the wall
Yes.
about their first confession. They're adorable, but they all say, I felt so clean afterwards, or I felt so relieved. It's so sweet.
But if you don't, that's okay too.
Yeah.
I remember my first confession, I was in second grade, my parents were like, do you feel better? And I was like, I feel better because it's over.
Yes.
I cried the hour before I had to go in. I barely got my eyes dried in time as a 7-year-old. And for the next few years, I felt that way. It wasn't until I was an adult and made a regular practice of it where I actually felt the grace of the sacrament. So if you don't leave always feeling great, know that you still got that grace and that your sins are still wiped free. But I think it does take a regular practice to feel it, because I am not someone It did not come naturally to me. I was not, so I was like, oh, I feel so good. I was like, oh, I'm so glad that's over. I don't have to come back to Lent.
And you feel better because of that anyway.
Right, it was more relief than anything, but regular practice does change that, so sorry to take.
No, that exactly is the kind of the witness that we need as far as the reception of this sacrament.
And
Pamela?
for me, that daily act of
Yes.
contrition and of daily examination of conscience really helps me to sort out what things are the little s sins that I can just go to God and say, help me with this.
Right.
But then there are those things that keep reoccurring every single freaking day, and I go, I need to take this one to confession.
Absolutely.
I had it just,
Please.
I had it described once as a really easy way to examine your conscience if you've gone through everything is look into your heart and decide who is sitting on the throne of your heart, or what is sitting on the throne of your heart. And if it's anything other than God, then there's the root of your issue right there. Even if the person on the throne of your heart is your spouse, or something that's a really good thing, there should be nothing else on the throne of your heart, which for me, as someone who goes through, my problem with the examination of conscience, I'm like, maybe I did that, I don't remember. Did I do that? I'll go through and agonize over every point. And so that's another thing to maybe recognize about yourself, and I know I'm getting like too deep into it now, but I feel very passionate about this
This is
subject. To maybe step back a little if you're someone who could talk yourself into every sin on the list and say, what or who is on the throne of my heart? And oftentimes I think you'll find that you are on the throne of your own heart, and that is the root of the issue. And from there it becomes very easy to pick out those things that you most need to confess. So I simplified a little.
Well, and we did our first confession last year during the
Parish
yeah,
Creek.
thank you.
Yes,
My
that will
brain
be your
lost
first
it.
opportunity.
And it was lovely. Like everyone really enjoyed it. It was a really positive experience, I think, for most of us. So
You're the person to talk about that,
yeah,
because you did it last year.
it was a beautiful ceremony, and everyone really enjoyed it. And then you had this moment where you got to just sit and think before and after. It wasn't as stressful as you would expect it to be. And I think that was a really good way to ease us into it, you know. And then Father Mark, being Father Mark, was lovely, and I'm sure that Father Tom will be the same way. So
He's an excellent confessor
yeah.
as well.
I've never seen a priest like clutch his pearls over something that I've said. You know, you
Yeah.
go in and think, oh my gosh, you know, here's a
Yeah.
zinger he's never heard. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and maybe
It's just not
something
gonna
that's weighing heavy on your heart is something small, and you're overthinking it, and then you realize at the end of that session that it wasn't as big of a deal as you thought it was. So
That's a great
it's
point.
nice.
Well, and what I hear you all getting at is it's really a deep personal encounter with the mercy of God.
Mm-hmm.
The priest is it very much the priest, the Latin word, right? In persona Christi. That priest is acting in the person of Christ. They don't care about your sins. Father Tom says there was only one original sin. It was Adam and Eve. Everything else is boring. They honestly don't care. It's true. Again, he's a hilarious guy.
Yep.
But it's a personal encounter with the mercy of Jesus. And so the church says, go once a year minimum. Once you get in the habit of it, it really is cleansing. This next one seems a little outdated, right? To receive Holy Communion at least once during the Easter season. And again, notice that it said season, right? In the church we have seasons. We have the Christmas season. We have the Easter season, which actually includes Lent and Easter. So technically the Easter season, broadly defined, is all the way from Ash Wednesday to Trinity Sunday, which is the Sunday after Pentecost Sunday, which is 50 days after Easter. So you've got like the 6 weeks of Lent plus 57 days after to meet this obligation. Again, it kind of seems outdated. Oh, you got to go to receive communion once a year. We go every Sunday. This goes back to the Middle Ages when a greater sense of this, oh, I'm unworthy, and the church literally had to force people to receive communion once a year. So this one's kind of outdated, but just receive Holy Communion once a year, and if it is just once a year during the Easter season. The next one's kind of nuts and boltsy, a little bit of the idea of fasting and abstaining, right? And so what's a fast day? So a fast day is a day on which we only eat one full meal. We still have 2 smaller meals. Kind of, no snacks in between those meals during the day. That's a fast day. And the day of abstinence is a day on which we don't eat meat. So there's only 2 fast days in the whole church calendar, and they're both in Lent. First one is on Ash Wednesday, and then the second one is on Good Friday. So those are the only 2 fast days. Again, just one major meal, and then 2 smaller ones, no snacks in between. The days of abstinence are Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, so those are both fast and abstinence. And then the Fridays in Lent, so we don't eat meat on the Fridays of Lent. The practice used to be kind of every Friday throughout the year. Many Catholics still keep this one. And it still technically is on the books that Fridays throughout the whole year, as Catholics, it's practice not to eat meat. But if we do, we just perform some type of other penance. You know, it's like, okay, well, I know I'm going to have a hamburger tonight, so maybe I won't go for that extra cup of coffee today. Some other type of penance on Fridays. Did I see your hand coming up?
It was just kind of interesting. When I went to school in Virginia at Christendom, every Friday in the cafeteria they had a no meat. Like they had no meat, so
Yeah.
they always had like a fish option,
Mhm.
and even like the sandwich bar and everything. They had tuna fish instead of their normal ham, turkey, things like that. And for the first several weeks I was there, it was really frustrating because I was not used to that at all, except during Lent. But eventually, you know, it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's kind of nice. And,
Yeah, so even, you know, the church really, we still think of, you know, Good Friday, right? And that carries throughout all Fridays a year, that's kind of every Sunday is kind of a mini Easter. Just how the Sundays in Lent don't count towards the 40 days of Lent. Every Sunday, even in the depths of Lent, are its own little mini Easter. So too, kind of every Friday in the church year is a mini Good Friday in a way. So,
And that shows up in the Rosary too.
yeah, that's what we say the Sorrowful Mysteries. And say the Sorrowful Mysteries on Friday and the Glorious Mysteries on Sunday. Yeah. So again, almost like a mini liturgical year within even the week of the church.
Mike, I have a question.
Yes, please.
You might know this as a history background, but I have a Catholic friend who said that the reason that we're allowed to eat fish was like a long time tradition, and it was kind of like a political thing at the time, where like fish was seen as okay or like a business move. Do you know why fish is exempt from like meat?
I don't know as much. I think kind of, yeah, because right, it's like, why is fish does not count as meat? On the one hand, it's cold-blooded, so technically it's a different type of animal, right? So it's not red meat per se, but it's the muscle of an animal. Shouldn't that also be meat? Yeah, I've never actually heard the history on that as much actually, but yeah, technically it does not count as meat. And the only thing I've ever kind of logically come up with as well is, yeah, it's a cold-blooded animal. It's not meat per se. But yeah, I actually have never looked at that. I can look into that some more about why fish doesn't count as meat as far as the fast and abstinence.
In the Eastern Church during Lent, it's a strict fast.
Right.
There's no dairy, there's
Right.
no meat at all, any day, the whole time. There's a huge restriction. And I think that the Catholic Church kind of loosened more. I think it started, but I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, no, it was also more severe. Also, another interesting thing about this whole idea of fast and abstinence, it's spiritual, right? It's self-discipline. It's that giving something up, you know, and uniting our sufferings to the sufferings of Christ, right during Lent. But it also used to be very practical. So imagine yourself like in Middle Ages Europe. It's Lent, we're, you know, like late winter, right? You know, January, February, March. People are starting to run out of food anyway. The spring harvest haven't come in yet. So it was kind of the way of the church also of stretching people's food supplies over that time as well. Or this idea that you wouldn't be having meat and dairy and those kind of things. It's like, well, because you would run out of the fresh stuff of that at that point anyway. Chickens aren't laying, right? The cows aren't going to be giving birth till spring. So in a way, it was like very practical of, well, we don't have access to these things, and the little food we do, let's stretch it by fasting and abstaining from what we do have remaining. So it was very practical in addition to the spiritual practice as well. And I'm going to look more into the thing about fish as well. That could also be a case where fish they could catch any time. It was a way of supplementing that food source as well. So that could be it.
Another thing is that if you look in the Old Testament, remember when we talked about the Exodus from Egypt and the manna that was given? God gave extra manna on Saturday, and that was the only day that it lasted.
Right.
So they didn't have to do anything on Sunday to keep the Sabbath holy. So, you know, all of this still ties together in different ways.
It does. Again, so just want to recap that since we kind of talked about Oh yeah, I should mention this as well. So who does these laws apply to? As far as the abstinence, not eating meat applies to 14 years old and older, within reason. If there's a medical reason or whatever. And fasting, the obligation to observe that is a day of fast from the years 18 years to 59. Kind of, younger kids below that, those older than 59, not obligated to observe this fast. Again, the church is reasonable with these. They realize that for little kids or with those that may be up there in years, this may be more of a burden, and they are exempt. So again, the 2 fast days, Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Days of abstinence, also Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. All the Fridays in Lent. And then kind of every Friday throughout the liturgical year can be a day of abstinence. And if we don't, then let's find some other type of penance on Fridays throughout the year. This doesn't necessarily fall under the church laws about fast and abstinence particularly, but I'll mention it here as well. As far as that little mini fast, right, we do before receiving Holy Communion, that we fast from food and drink an hour before receiving Holy Communion. Again, this is also a change too. This is now, it's just an hour. Water and medicine is always okay. That doesn't break that fast. And again, this is a loosening up. The church used to have to fast from midnight the night before receiving Holy Communion. Again, now it's just that hour before. And again, that's just out of respect for Jesus, really, when you think about it. You're going to receive God, and you're going to mix him in with donuts and scrambled eggs and everything you just ate 10 minutes before. I mean, really, when you think about it, we're cleansing ourselves so that we can be open and have a nice reception for Jesus when he arrives. In a way.
And I think we all know that we could become re-educated what real hunger is.
True.
There's real spiritual hunger for something. That was the one thing that got me through the time when I was trying to get into RCIA as a person married to a Catholic who wasn't Catholic, and not being able to receive communion, was that somebody said to me, you can give your hunger for Jesus up to Jesus. And that really helped me.
Mm-hmm. So again, those are kind of that idea, just kind of highlighting the ideas of this church law as far as fasting and abstaining. Next one is to contribute to the support of the church, and this is not just means, I put my $2 in the offertory basket, I'm good to go. It's beyond that, right? Because some of us aren't able to do that. But really, it's the 3 T's that we talk about: our time, our talent, and our treasure. Is according to each person's abilities and what the resources and talents that people have been blessed with. So to contribute to the support of the church doesn't mean just giving money. It's whatever that time, talent, and treasure for the good work of the church may be. So that's just kind of a basic contribute to this organization of salvation. The next one, to observe the laws of the church concerning marriage. This is kind of very general. Basically, it has to do with people getting married in the presence of a priest or a deacon, there being 2 witnesses present, going through the marriage prep classes, the pre-Cana classes, going into the sacrament very intentionally. And there's also some rules about marrying non-Catholics or non-Christians and things involved with that. Not too onerous there. And then the last one, to support the missionary work of the church. Again, this idea of evangelization, being the light of Christ out in the world. This could be, contributing to Catholic charities, the work of missionaries in third world countries. Our own Father Tom, right, served as a missionary in Zimbabwe, and we're going to be kind of sending resources to the missions that he worked there, since we have that connection now. One way that I see that I contribute to the missionary work of the church is like to sponsor a child through Unbound, which is the old CFCA. I have a little foster child as far as through Unbound in the Philippines, and it's a great ministry. It's like $400 a year, which is nothing to us, but it helps him and his family out tremendously. And every couple months I get a letter and we write back and forth, and it's great. It really makes a difference. And again, it's a little way of contributing to the missionary support or missionary work of the church. Again, a lot of different ways to do this. Baseline, pray for the work of the church in third world countries, or heck, even where I'm from in Appalachia, Ohio. I mean, that's very much still missionary territory, if you will, in our own country.
Hey Mike, just as an aside, because Christmas is coming, a lot of people always say, what can I give the priest? Because I want to give the Christmas gift. His #1 request is money for Zimbabwe. So he finds every possible way he can to send his own money to Zimbabwe, to the mission he was involved in. And he always says, I don't need stuff. If you're gonna give me something, send a contribution to Zimbabwe, so.
Yeah, and we can collect those in the parish office and kind of collate it and send it there.
And if you would like to do it as a class, I can get a card and we could just give him a love gift from RCIA. Okay, note to self.
Good stuff. All right, so those are the 7 precepts of the church. Again, kind of like nuts and bolts. Oh, it sounds like a lot of rules and regulations. But when you get down to it, it's about love, and again, these things that the church institutes to help us break us out of ourselves and our routine a little bit and acknowledge what is the focus of our lives, where is God in the center of all these things. Any questions about the precepts of the church? Okay, good. Getting through more of this law stuff. So now we're going to finally get more to like the intro to morality part here. So morality as Catholics is a lot more than just following the 10 Commandments and the precepts, 7 precepts of the church. It's more than that. I think in today's society we have a really low baseline in terms of what it means to be a moral person. It's what I call, I'm a good person morality. I haven't killed anybody and I agree that the Nazis were bad, so that makes me a good person. No, there's a lot more to it than that, right? There's a whole heap more to it than that. Living a morally upright life means listening to our consciences, discerning right from wrong, intentionally deciding to do good and to avoid evil, and to cultivate good habits, right? I mean, it's a lot more than just, I haven't killed anybody, I'm a good person. Yeah, okay, it's a good place to start, but we're called to so much more than that, right? So before moving into our discussion of virtue and sin and grace, I want to say a word about free will and conscience, because these are intrinsically human things. Again, this idea of philosophy and understanding ourselves as rational beings. So free will, which is the power of determining our own acts, the power to act or to not act, doing one thing or another as we please. This is one of the greatest gifts that God has bestowed upon us as human beings. And no one, including God, can ever make us do anything. There may be consequences for that, but nobody can ever really make us do anything that we don't choose. And in fact, God never forces himself on us either. So again, free will, tremendous gift. The idea of being able to kind of chart our own course, tremendous gift, but also the one that can get us into the most trouble. Kind of this idea, right from the original Spider-Man movies, right? With great power comes great responsibility at the same time, right? So we have free will, but it doesn't mean that we're just free to do whatever we want. We are free to make choices for ourselves, but true freedom entails choosing what is right because we recognize it to be right. We've arrived at the conclusion that this is the right thing to do, and I am free to choose what is right. So again, this idea of free will is very much tied to our power of reason as rational beings. God could have created all these little love robots, right, that loved him perfectly and do his will and don't cause any problems and do everything and serve him perfectly, but that's not what God wanted. He wants us to choose to love him, to choose to do the right thing using our free will. Again, us arriving to choose to do that as our own free will. And again, him not forcing us on it. God will never make us love him. Also, all these goofy philosophers out there that say that we don't have free will, it's total bunk. Look at their lives, they don't believe it either. It's the most, sometimes you read these philosophers or people, musings on the human experience, and they're like the Pharisees. They tie up all these bundles and tie themselves in knots, and you start questioning your whole existence and what is real and is all this, and you're like, wow, this is really deep stuff. And then you go research their lives. They didn't believe any of this. They just wrote this stuff down because it sounded cool and it sold books or made them look important in front of people. They didn't believe it either. So we do have free will. Anything to the contrary is simply wrong. Free will, we also have conscience. I want to speak a little bit about that. Kind of ties back to natural law. Conscience is infused onto our human heart by God, often flowing from natural law. Again, it's that kind of little voice inside of us, our Jiminy Cricket, right, from Pinocchio, telling us what is right and what is wrong. We all have this to a certain extent. Again, the idea of we feel guilty, a little twinge of guilt when we do something wrong, and feeling fulfilled when we do something that is right. But it's not this idea of, well, if it feels right, do it. Because actually following our conscience may cause us physical or internal pain if it's doing the right thing that is countercultural in some way, or doing the right thing even when it's difficult. So conscience in a way is that link connecting law and actions. Conscience helps us to apply what we know to be true to our everyday activities. The formation of our conscience, right, is influenced by our parents, how we're raised, our friends, our environment, what we grew up with, school, life experiences. All these things go into the formation of our conscience. And depending, right, as a result of all these things, our conscience could be true, it could be erroneous, it could be certain, it can be dubious. So that's why it's supremely important responsibility not only to listen to our conscience, to listen to that little voice inside of us, but also to make sure that our conscience is being properly formed. How we do this by making an effort to know right from wrong. We've kind of got those baseline with the 10 Commandments, 7 precepts of the church. But also, and we're going to talk about this, practicing virtue and becoming familiar with the church's teaching on tricky subjects. Not just what the church teaches, but why. What's the rationale, what's the truth behind what the church teaches on some of this tricky stuff. We always have a supreme responsibility to listen to and act in accordance with our conscience. If our conscience is clear and certain about whether we should or should not do something, we always should follow the voice of our conscience. Interesting, right? If our conscience is saying something is sinful, even though in objective reality it may not be, we go ahead and do it anyway, it actually does become a sin for us. So we thought that was wrong, even though it technically wasn't, but we decided to do it anyway, technically that becomes a sin for us. And then the converse is actually true as well. So again, the formation of our conscience is a process. It's infused into our souls by God as part of our rational beings, but again, it's a formational process and influenced by a great number of outside factors. As Father Mark always used to say, we grow over time, right? It's a process.